Confused about the title? Well, you should be. It's actually a quote from a very infamous man involved with one of our nation's favorite pastimes, alcohol. Alcohol, something we view today as a common piece of our everyday life. When we go to the store and see it placed upon the shelves, we don't blink an eye. However, years ago, in the 1920s to be exact, alcohol was deemed unsuitable for the public, and the distribution, manufacturing, and transportation of the well-appreciated beverage was banned. However, this didn't come without resistance. There were disputes over prohibition, some saying it was a violation of rights to restrict access to alcohol and that it went against the American way. Others thought that it wasn't something to focus so intently on, as there were other pressing matters to be attended to in such a large nation. There were of course even some who just wanted to keep their alcohol for another day. Politicians battled over this issue for quite some time, both the for and opposing side throwing arguments around again and again. However, soon the for-prohibition side gained more support from the help of the temperance movement and World War I, providing an opportunity to gain the support of citizens who wanted to use brewing beer materials to make bread for soldiers. Thus, the amendment was made to easily pass due to the listed reasons, and President Hoover, politicians, and citizens alike naively hoped for this to be the solution to creating a near-perfect nation. At the time, there was reason for this, people assuming the removal of alcohol from their society would bring about some sort of utopia. Yet the very opposite happened. Loopholes were found in the amendment, and people did everything they could to get their fill of alcohol. Petty criminals turned to well-established gangsters took advantage of citizens' desperation to get alcohol, and created an underground business that generated an overwhelming amount of situations detrimental to the common good of the nation. Initially, the idea of prohibition was just that, an idea. It was pushed by groups such as the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Anti-Saloon League during the temperance movement, beginning during the very start of the 20th century during the Progressive Era. These groups believed that banning alcohol would bring about positive moral principles such as self-control, and that it would benefit women at the time. There was a stigma against alcohol, as men would go home and beat their wives and kids after coming home from the pub, so it was perceived that getting rid of alcohol would benefit women and the nation's character as a whole. Additionally, there were also notions which said that banning alcohol would enable people to raise taxes on other goods and lower crime rates. Thus, after groups such as the ASL and the WCTU intensely advocated for the passage of a dry nation, the 18th Amendment and the Volstead Act were enacted January 16, 1920.
Say no to alcohol! Say no to alcohol! Lips that touch alcohol will not touch mine! Say no to alcohol!
Though the temperance groups had won in their fight, there were actually quite a few Americans who were outraged at the idea of having to lose their favorite beverage. Many Americans scrambled to get what their government deemed their last drink, but this wouldn't be the end of their drinking shenanigans. Surprisingly, it actually wasn't illegal to consume alcohol, and there were many more exceptions to the new amendment. For example, people could purchase alcohol as medicine for illnesses such as the flu or even toothaches. The discovery of these loopholes was only the beginning of the fall of prohibition. Speakeasies, illegal establishments that sold alcohol, found ways to make their actions a little more tolerable by law. One way was the blind pig method, marketing strange attractions such as blind pigs, striped pigs, and more, with the promise of complimentary alcohol to their patrons. However, some establishments would be found out and deemed unsuitable, their produce being poured down the drain by officials.
Alright, hello folks. You want to see the most amazing sights you've ever seen in your life? Come on in to this wonderful room and you'll see a blind pig. You heard me folks? A pig that is blind. And for every $5 you pay, you get one complimentary bottle of alcohol. Come on in folks. Yes sir, would you like to see a blind pig? For alcohol? Complimentary. You're not paying for the alcohol. Or it's $5. Thank you, sir. Alright, here's your complimentary shot of alcohol. Thank you. Please enjoy the blind pig.
Bootleggers completely disregarded the law, taking the production of alcohol into their own hands. They would sell it themselves or make deals, possibly even be forced into deals, with gangsters. Bootleggers would make moonshine, bathtub gin, and whatever kind of drink they could pass off as alcohol, as they knew some citizens could drink anything labeled as such out of desperation. Due to bootleggers being desperate for cash, many would produce their alcohol in unsafe conditions, and their customers could fall ill after consuming the nasty concoctions. It's approximated that some 10,000 citizens died at the hands of poorly crafted drinks before Prohibition was repealed. Gangsters, the big dogs of the Prohibition era. One of these big dogs was mentioned at the beginning of the video with a certain quote of his. That gangster was Al Capone, one of the most infamous gangsters of his time. Al Capone and those in business similar to his took advantage of the loopholes of Prohibition and utilized their skills to avoid the law, even though they were profiting off of very clearly illicit methods. In Capone's case, he had created a system of importing alcohol from states and even Canada, and was in cahoots with those who transported the beverage, bodyguards, and officials who could persecute him. He'd used his income to get his way, and it was the same for other gangsters such as Charles Lukey Luciano, George Bugs Morin, and many more. The officials did end up catching Capone, though, over something many probably didn't expect: tax evasion. Capone's stingy ways and unwillingness to pay his legal taxes using illegal money landed him in jail for the next 10 years after his capture by Elliot Ness, a man who was part of the Untouchables, which is a group made up of young men who were unable to be bribed by the likes of Capone. Though Capone was locked up, crime didn't stop there, and it was in fact still at an all-time high. Gangsters were still battling one another over territory or bullying one another for profits. Citizens were sick of it. Additionally, the Great Depression rolled around in 1929, and the effects of removing alcohol, though previously felt, were now of greater magnitude. People recognized how the loss of jobs from removing alcohol and the lack of taxes able to be placed upon alcohol was greatly affecting the economy, and they wanted their prosperous nation back. Under President Roosevelt, officials eventually submitted and repealed Prohibition due to a multitude of reasons, including a lack of cooperation from the states in investigating and prosecuting violations of Olstead, corruption being prevalent among officials and even agents of Prohibition, patrolling the shorelines of the Atlantic, Pacific, and Gulf Coast, and the many inlets and hiding places for smugglers being nearly impossible, and many citizens questioning on if this restriction of their freedom was even acceptable. These reasons could all fall under why organized crime was so prosperous and why officials became overwhelmed with how Prohibition had created a massive underground monopoly on alcohol and even developed into deeper industries such as distributing weapons, gambling, and etc. As discussed, crime was widespread, and during the harsh times of Great Depression, the fight just wasn't worth it anymore.
Hey, I just saw you saw alcohol.
So you tell anyone? I want to tell you your name. Don't say anything.
Not my fault.
Don't say anything.
So, I hear you're in need of some financial help. Yes. So here's the plan. I'll slip you over some money, and in return, you'll slip me over some home for anything. I'm listening. Money will be transferred to your company. Tell anyone, and it'll be
The government effectively repealed Prohibition by ratifying the 21st Amendment in 1933. The temperance laws continued to carry on the ways of Prohibition until Mississippi, the last dry state, got rid of these rules in 1966. While there are still some states with characteristics of dry states to this day, it can be said that never again will there be another attempt at completely banning America's prized beverage, lest she fights back.
Oh, my first day in court I wish to report, then witness a story so true. Oh, and as they closed its case, a young man raised his face and began all the facts to review. Oh, they call it that old Mountain Dew.